Hey guys, so now we're going to be talking about theories of emotion. So we know that there are some certain components of emotions, but how do they interact together to bring forth a specific emotion? How does that happen? Which component comes first? So we're going to be discussing three different theories that argue three different possibilities of how this happens. So the first one is called the James Lange theory. So this theory says that we experience emotions because our physical experiences. So our body informs us about how we should feel. So what James Lange says is that first we have the physiological arousal, and then we pair that with whatever emotion matches that arousal. So, for example, the perception of the bear example. If you see a bear, then you have that physiological response of sweating, increased heart rate, and then that feeling of fear. So the physiological stuff comes first. So you sweat, and then you're like, oh, I must be afraid. So you can think of this as we are afraid because we run. So you run away first, and then you're like, oh, I must be afraid. So here's another emotional depiction of the James Lange theory. So that our stimulus is a bear, and then you're aroused physically. Your heart starts pounding, you start trembling, sweating, and maybe you start running away too. And then you pair that arousal with the emotion. So there is some evidence to support this theory. Certain body actions can influence emotion, which is really interesting. So, for instance, smiling and frowning when you're reading comic books, if you stick a pencil in your mouth and force yourself to smile, this can actually make you happier and make you think that the comic book is funnier. However, if you do the opposite, where you stick the pencil in your mouth and make yourself frown, the comic book won't be nearly as funny. So this is what she's doing here. She has that pencil to remind her to keep smiling, and she's actually laughing here because it's actually making her laugh. Where here, she's frowning and she's not finding it funny. So what this indicates is that your body's actions do actually contribute some to how you feel. So the feedback of what your body's doing does indicate what you should feel at the moment. So to some degree, you can fake it till you make it. To some degree, you can just keep on smiling and then maybe you'll be happy. To some degree. But there's issues with this theory. So there is the issue of people that cannot physically express emotion. This theory would state that if they can't physically express it, then they should not be able to have the emotion at all. So, for instance, this would be like quadriplegics. They can't run away if they see that bear. They might not, their muscles can't tense up. They can't tremble. So, they shouldn't be afraid, but they are. That's a very normal reaction to seeing a bear, is the quadriplegics still are able to be afraid of seeing a dangerous animal. And people who have trouble smiling, so people who have trouble expressing emotional affect should not feel happiness, but they do. It might be dampened a little bit, but they still are able to feel things. So that is an issue. So that kind of shows that it's not all about physical feedback. Physical feedback may influence emotion some, but that's not the whole picture. Which brings us to the Cannon-Bard theory, which is a different theory that says our bodily reactions and our emotions happen at the same exact time, and they don't affect each other. So this one believes that the bodily reactions happen too slowly to cause emotion, so that's why it doesn't affect emotions, because it's happening all at the same time. I mean, our brains work really, really fast, so that does make sense. If you're seeing a bear, your brain is processing that image of that bear. But also, your body reacts really fast too. So, what it's saying is you see that bear, and then your brain goes, I'm scared. And then at the same time, your body goes, I'm sweating. My heart rate is going up and up. So, an example of this is there's that bear. Oh, it's growling at you now. And he's screaming, and his heart's pounding, he's trembling, he's sweating, and he might be running away now. There's evidence for this, and there's evidence against this, just like in James Lange theory. So the evidence for this is that when you disconnect the brain and the spinal cord from the rest of the body, so this is essentially just cutting off the brain, the central nervous system, and the peripheral nervous system, no, just the central nervous system, from the rest of your body, animals can still have emotional reactions. So they won't have any other feedback from their body at all. They won't be able to gather any information from their body, but they can still have emotions, which indicates that they occur at the same time. But the evidence against this is that our bodily reactions happen really fast. So it's possible that they can cause emotion. It's possible that they can change so fast that we can go through a series of emotions that's influenced by them. And this theory does not explain a concept called the misattribution of arousal. And what this means is sometimes people will have a certain level of arousal. We'll have certain bodily reactions. We might get our heartbeat racing. We might start sweating. We might start trembling. But we might pair it to the wrong source of whatever has made us aroused. And there is a theory that does explain the misattribution of arousal, which is called the two-factor theory. So what this theory states is that emotions are determined by the physiological arousal we are experiencing and our cognitive appraisal of the situation. So this theory is also called the Schotter and Singer theory, because those are the guys that came up with it. And this explains the misattribution of arousal because you have the physiological arousal as one factor, but then you also have your cognitive appraisal as another factor that influence what you're feeling. So you can have that cognitive appraisal misinterpret the situation and have you feel something different. So a really good example of this is being excited versus nervous. These are really similar feelings, actually. They have very, very similar physiological states. And theater kids, actresses, politicians, anyone who is often on stage or public speaking, they don't have stage fright, right? So they actually find it thrilling to be on stage. They find it exciting. They still have that level of arousal when they go on stage, but they are having that cognitive appraisal of it being exciting and thrilling to do. But a lot of people have stage fright or are afraid of public speaking. And so when they get that level of arousal from having to do that, they get nervous. They have that cognitive appraisal of, oh, this is scary, this is making me nervous, what if I screw up in front of everyone? Rather than, ooh, this is exciting, like, I'm gonna nail it, like, I'm ready. It's all about the cognitive appraisal on which one you want to experience in that. So, back to the bear example. So the stimulus is our bear. We see a bear, and then we have the arousal. So our heart's pounding, we're trembling, sweating, running away. And then we also have that cognitive label of like, that's a scary bear. He's dangerous. I should be afraid probably. And then both of these together produce the emotion fear. So it takes aspects of the previous two theories. The similarity it has to James Lange theory is that feedback from the body is involved from emotional experiences, and we do have some evidence to support that. But as you know, it's not all the bodily feedback. And then it has similar aspects to the Cannon-Bard theory because bodily feedback lacks emotional specificity. So it's just the bodily feedback alone is not going to give you one specific emotion. So how they did this is with a new addition by adding thoughts and cognition to fill the gap where the non-specific feedback is, so we can fill that gap and determine this is where we decide how we're feeling through these thoughts. It's both the bodily feedback and how we're assessing the situation that make us feel how we're feeling. So a really cool example of this that is like illustrates this really, really well is called the bridge experiment. So the bridge experiment had male participants ages 18 to 35. They were all single, and they were split into two different groups. So one group crossed a safe bridge, and the other group crossed a more dangerous, rickety bridge. It was a little bit more scary. And then after they got off the bridge, after they fully crossed it, they were approached by an attractive female Confederate and asked to explain the story behind an ambiguous image. So this is the ambiguous image here. So they were shown this image, and then they had to write a story about it. And then the female Confederate gave them her phone number if they had any questions. So what they were really measuring here is whether these men had any sexual content in their stories and whether they tried to call the Confederate later. So why would they be interested in this? Why would they be interested in the sexual content and whether they tried to call the Confederate? Well, because the safe bridge shouldn't arouse them physically, but the rickety, dangerous bridge might. But after being physically aroused by a scary bridge, they're approached by an attractive female. Are they going to assign that arousal, that physical arousal, to the emotion of fear? Or are they going to assign that physical arousal to the emotion of sexual attraction? So, the experimental bridge, the rickety bridge. So it's a swaying bridge. It's a suspension bridge. It's rated as one of the scariest bridges in the world. It's 5 feet wide, 450 feet long. It tilts and sways, and it's a 230-foot drop into rocks and shallow rapids. It's definitely expected to increase arousal. I would not enjoy crossing that. And then the control bridge is a solid wood bridge further upriver. It was constructed of heavy cedar. It's 10 feet above the shallow creek that ran into the main river. It has high handrails, no tilting or swaying. So it's very sturdy, not that far above the water. Doesn't invoke any sort of danger aspect. So this is not expected to increase arousal. So what results did they get? So men on the experimental bridge had more sexual content in their stories and tried to call the female experimenter more. 50% of the experimental condition called her. That is so many. And then 12.5% in the control condition called her. That is a huge difference. Why is this? It's because of the misattribution of arousal. They had increased arousal from walking across that scary bridge. That scary bridge made them have their heart rate go up and sweat and had their sympathetic nervous system going. So they were very aroused. And then when they got off the bridge, they were still aroused, but instead of attributing that arousal to the bridge, they attributed it to seeing that girl. They saw the woman and were like, oh, I'm aroused because of her.